Welcome to Otter Creek Church. As you're making your way in, we just wanted you to know that this morning is going to feel a little bit different than the past several weeks. Over the last several weeks, we have learned about celebration and dance and praise and the quality and condition of our heart as it relates to what we do when we're together to learn about God and to experience God. We talked about raising our hands before God in humility. We talked about kneeling as an act of surrender or submission, and all these different understandings of worship. But since we're curating, or we're carefully working our way through the Psalms, it's important to know that 70% of the Psalms deal with pain, loss, grief, and disappointment with God. And some of us grew up in families or church cultures where we did not know how to talk about being disappointed with God. We didn't know how to talk about the seeming absence of God as Jesus puts on full display in the Gospels in the Garden of Gethsemane. We were taught to be good boys and good girls and don't ask any really big questions. And if you have them, keep them to yourselves. Unless you have a really good youth minister, then you're allowed to ask them. And what we want to do this morning at this part of our Heart of Worship series is to encourage you to be open and honest in your own spirit, whoever you came with this morning, about the deep disappointments and the things that still hurt in your life. There's a lot about humanity I don't understand and that's mysterious to me, but one thing that I know for sure about humans, all of us carry some deep, unnamed grief. It could be the end of a relationship that was really important to us. It could be tension that exists with one of our children. It could be a divorce, which you spent hours and thousands of dollars on couples therapy and it just didn't help. It could be an addiction that you've been wrestling. All of us carry something within us that feels unresolved and incomplete. And what the Psalms encourage us to do with the Psalms of Lament is to bring your whole self to God, to bring all of it to God, and to believe that God can handle it. So this morning, the tone and the mood is going to be different. It's going to be more confessional because we want to be true to the way the Psalms depict worship in the story of Israel. So we invite you into a time of confession and lament and telling the truth. Let's worship together.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed that you're good, your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith to trust what you say, that you're good, your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. I may be weak, I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, my God, you never will. I may be weak, but your spirit's strong in me. My flesh may fail, my God, you never will.
Our first psalm this morning is Psalm 46. And as you continue your meditation, I encourage you to listen with your heart and soul and spirit. Maybe close your eyes, but listen for the sound of waters and the majesty of the mountains. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heavens. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress."
Grand earth is quaked before, moved by the sound of his voice, and seas that are shaken and stirred can be calmed and broken from my regard. And through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well with me. Far be it from me to not believe, even when my eyes can't see. And this mountain that's in front of me, it will be thrown into the midst of the sea. And through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you, and it is well. It is well. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and wind still know His name. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and winds still know His name. The waves and winds still know His name. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my
Luana and I have one child, a son named Christopher. We adopted him when he was 19 days old. Today he's 38. And for more than 20 of those years, he struggled with addiction. For the last year and a half, because of methadone treatment program, he's been sober and trying to build a life. But we have had some really dark days with him. And 2001 was especially bad. Luana and I were desperate. We lived in constant fear of getting a phone call that said that he'd been arrested or that he'd overdosed. There were times when we honestly wondered if we would ever see him alive again. We found these candles that would burn for a whole week, and so we bought boxes of them. And every Sunday, we'd light one, and we'd let that flame represent our prayers for the rest of the week, because we were just too empty and drained and exhausted to pray them ourselves. Well, during that time, I found myself being drawn over and over again to Psalm 42. My tears have been my food day and night. My soul is downcast within me. And there was one line in particular that just jumped out. Deep calls to deep. In the roar of your waterfalls, your waves and your breakers have swept over me. It was like that psalm was expressing my deepest hurt. Even my doubt, with lines like, "Have you forgotten me? Where are you, Lord?" When we were planning for the Zoe conference that year, I mentioned to the group about how much that particular psalm had meant to me, and my belief that there were lots of people in our churches who were suffering but just didn't know how to express it. And so I suggested that we concentrate that year on lament. So we chose the theme, Deep Calls to Deep. And I wrote a song based on Psalm 42 that we recorded that summer. Well, the CD wasn't going to be released until October. But in the first week of September, I sent an advance copy of my song to my good friend Larry Mudd, who was the worship minister at the Manhattan Church. So a few days later, Deep Calls to Deep was sung for the very first time anywhere at that church in New York City the Sunday after 9/11. And it means so much to me to think that a song that was written during one of the darkest periods of my life helped people express their own hurt and sadness after that unspeakable tragedy. I've heard similar stories since then, and I'm just convinced that sooner or later, all of us face something, some moment, some tragedy that causes us to cry out, "Have you forgotten me? Where are you, Lord?" On any given Sunday, people come to the table with that hurt, with that ache, with that emptiness. And Jesus says, "Come. All who are weary, I'll give you rest." There is comfort, even in our darkest days, in Jesus. There is comfort at the table.
God, we thank you for that comfort. God, I thank you for Randy and for Luana and for their son, Chris. I thank you just for their vulnerability and their honesty in sharing with us today. God, I know that you have been a part of that journey with them every single day, and we are so grateful that you are faithful, God, and that you are constant. I pray that today as we come and as we come to the table, I pray that you would just fill us with your peace this morning. I pray that you would fill us with your comfort where it's needed. God, we know that you see us, and we know that you love us, and we thank you. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
From the depths of my soul I cry out. From the depths of my soul I cry out, Lord, can you hear me? Have mercy, oh God. From the depths of my soul I cry out. In the midst of the sea I cry out. In the midst of the sea I cry out. Lord, make me the water is over my head. In the midst of the sea I cry out. There is a time to mourn. There is a time to weep. There is a time for sorrow when deep calls to deep. In my moments of grief I cry out. In my moments of grief I cry out. Have you forgotten me? Where are you, Lord? In my moments of grief I cry out. There is a time to mourn. There is a time to weep. There is a time for sorrow when deep calls to deep. From the depths of my soul I cry out. From the depths of my soul I cry out. Still I will praise you, Lord. Still I will praise you, Lord. In the depths of my soul I cry out. In the depths of my soul I cry out. In the depths of my soul I cry out. In the depths of my soul I cry out. In the depths of my soul I cry out. Jesus, we do cry out to you, and some of us in this room are dealing with pain and tragedy and stress and anxiety and fear and chaos. And so we just give this up to you. We hand you our fears and our worries. And we thank you for giving us an opportunity to cry out to you. And we love you. Amen. We're going to take just a minute just to talk about an incredible ministry. And before we do, I'd like to ask the servers to go ahead and pass the trays around as we receive and collect the offering today. Thank you for giving. Thank you for being obedient and faithful in this. When you give, you allow Otter Creek to be a part of some pretty amazing kingdom work, not just in this city, but globally as well. And so thank you for doing that. And there is an organization that Otter Creek partners with that is particularly dear and near to my heart. And that organization is Youth Encouragement Services. And 13 years ago, I was introduced to YES. And I actually, if it weren't for YES, I probably would not know my wife, Allison. And so I'm very thankful for Youth Encouragement Services. And I'm thankful for the incredible work that they're doing in the safe spaces that they are creating for kids that are just, that we have to lament because that are in incredibly tough situations. And we thank the volunteers and the people on the board and the center directors. And we just want to celebrate what God is doing through that organization and just providing an opportunity for kids to be safe and to be mentored and to be taught and to be poured into. And they are learning about Jesus, and they are learning just how to cope and how to succeed in the circumstances that they are in. And so I am really honored that I get to introduce Viva this morning. Would you please welcome Viva Price, the Director of Youth Encouragement Services?
Thank you so much. And on behalf of Youth Encouragement Services, I want to say thank all of you for remembering our ministry and just being such an integral part of it from its inception. In Nashville, as the landscape changes so rapidly, it's easy to forget about the families that are residing in the shadows of that expansion. But in Proverbs 31, 8 through 9, it says to speak for those. Come so everyone. I wanted you to just hear the message. Okay. It says to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And I have been able to witness firsthand over the last year and a half that is what Otter Creek does. You all have come to volunteer with our kids. You all have given not only gifts of resources, but just gifts of love, right? Hope and encouragement. There's a stat that you all could see today as you read about Youth Encouragement Services that 9 out of 10 of our families have an annual income of less than $21,000. And over half of them have an income of less than $10,000 in a city that requires about 8 times that much to live comfortably. But beyond that stat, what's been most vexing to me is to also witness the pain and the grieving and the sorrow that accompanies that poverty. So within a couple weeks of Christmas last year, there were 3 deaths to violence. And in the last year and a half alone, 2 of our former students died at the hands of gun violence. 5 children lost their parents as a result of the opioid epidemic. And 1 family had 3 relatives die actually within 6 months from violence. So considering what that can do to your spirit and sort of the loneliness, the debilitating feelings of brokenness that sort of accompany that suffering. For our families, unfortunately, that's commonplace. I often talk about the hope that we're able to provide, right? Because we know that it's in the darkest times that the light of Christ shines the brightest. But the word that kept coming to my spirit in the middle of the night was justice, right? So it's beyond the hope that you all have been able to give. It's justice through providing opportunities for our kids to reach their full potential, for them to recognize their own light, and for them to come together to let that shine, so that the dark problems of their community don't engulf them and don't overtake them. So with your support, we just appreciate you, right? And on behalf of the kids and families of YES, I'm speaking out on their behalf, as the scripture says. We want to thank you for making their problems your own problems and for offering both justice and hope. We're able to provide these opportunities through the gifts that you all have given and through your continued encouragement and prayers. So thank you for giving children the space to be kids and the justice to be able to have the freedom to do that. So continue to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And thank you.
If you have your Bible, would you turn to Psalm 13? In just a moment, we're going to let those words run over us in Psalm chapter 13. For the last several weeks, all throughout this series, we've been asking the question of what happens when we come together. What are the possibilities? How can we change? How can we be different? Does God still speak to us? Does God still move in our hearts when we come together as brothers and sisters in faith? And so this morning, as you picked up on, even if you came in late and didn't hear my introduction, you've noticed a different tone, a different mood than you've experienced the last several weeks. We are way past the dancing on stage Sunday and hands raised, turning in circles before the Lord as David models in his life. What you need to know about the Psalms is this. The Psalms do not theologize. They do not make everything nice and neat and tight and doctrinal. They're not precise. They are vulnerable. The Psalms are often angry. They are full of sadness and hope and cynicism and despair and sometimes confidence, but oftentimes mistrust. It's been pointed out to me by several people that so much of the Bible seems to be God trying to communicate to us through the medium of human experience and intellect. But the Psalms are like one moment in the Bible where the psalmists say, okay, God, you've been speaking to us. Now it's our turn to talk. You're going to listen to us for a little bit. They are uniquely raw and human. If you don't believe me, just read the 137th Psalm about what the psalmist says about innocent people that he doesn't like. There's a part of the Psalms that feel a little bit gross and a little bit, I don't know if I should trust this. They feel manic. If you go from Psalm 22, the psalm that Jesus quotes on the cross of my God, the seeming absence and disappearance of God, into Psalm 23, its next door neighbor, the most quoted passage in the entire Old Testament, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's like, what is happening in these emotions here? The Psalms are not always great theology, which makes the Psalms great theology. Meaning there's lots of things in the Psalm, it's like, well, I don't believe that. Do you believe that? Is that true about God? Is God work that way? Am I supposed to have enemies, as David seems to have all throughout the Psalms? But it makes it great theology because it makes it very human and very connected to the life that we experience. There's three basic kinds of Psalms, and this helped me a long time ago when I first started learning about the Psalms, because when you approach the Psalms, it can be very intimidating. There are 150. But some scholars have sat down and said, there's three basic rhythms, or there's this cadence to understanding the Psalms. There's three categories. If these things are hard for you to remember, just think about the life of Jesus. The life, the death, and the resurrection. They're called Psalms of orientation. This is when everything is as it should be. When you have puppies and ice cream and the sun is shining and your team wins and everything in your life just seems to be all lined up, right? And we have those moments, and intuitively in our gut we know, oh, I know this is great, but I know it's not going to last. We all feel that way, like on Saturday night when you've had this great Sabbath, or Sunday and you're like, work is coming on Monday, right? You have those moments of joy, but they're fleeting. That's what the Psalms are describing in the Psalms of orientation. When the world is as it should be. But things don't stay that way. If you think about the natural rhythms of many relationships, things change. Chaos, sin, deceit, death enters, and now there are Psalms of disorientation. When nothing seems as it should be, when all hell is breaking loose, and you wonder, this person that I fell in love with in the season of orientation, who are they in this season of disorientation? They've got annoying habits. They do things that I don't like. Welcome to your life. Psalms of disorientation. But then, of course, in Christian hope, Jewish hope, there are Psalms of reorientation, or Psalms of resurrection. When God puts everything back together and you are stronger and more beautiful and more just and more like Jesus than you were in the season of orientation. You took on the strength of that which you overcome, and now in this season of reorientation, you are way stronger than you were in the first two. Almost every marriage I know goes through that rhythm. Every roommate in college, every close friend, everything that's meaningful, including your career and your work, follows that pattern of orientation, disorientation, reorientation. Life, death, and resurrection. You see this in pop music, you see it in the hymns, you see it in our relationships. It's everywhere around you. And I love how Philip Yancey captures this. This is what he says about the Psalms. The Psalms are not pronouncements from on high, delivered with full apostolic authority on matters of faith and practice. They are personal prayers in the form of poetry written by a variety of people: peasants, kings, professional musicians, rank amateurs, in wildly fluctuating moods. Psalms give examples of ordinary people struggling mightily to align what they believe about God with what they actually experience. I had a woman come up to me after first service, whom I've known for a long time, who lost a child 4 years ago. And I could see in her eyes that what we sung about this morning, what we learned about this morning, spoke to her in a way that she has not been spoken to in some time. This is a family friend of ours. I didn't even know she was in Nashville. I didn't even know that she would be at Otter Creek, because something happens when you live in the Psalms that speaks to you in the depths of your experience and your frustrations with God. There are 150 of these songs, and 70% of them, over 2/3 of these psalms, talk about the disorientation, the disappointment, the pain. But if you said, if I do, you would do. But what about reaping and sowing? I'm a good person, so why am I? 70% of these 150 are dedicated to being disappointed with how things turned out. So we've talked about raising our hands. We've talked about kneeling. We've talked about dancing and passion and celebration and what happens in the heart. But we will be emotionally unfaithful to the Psalms if we don't talk about lament and grief and pain. And I know some people are like, I don't go to church to be sad. Well, guess what? You're already dismissing sadness in your life when you say things like that. We're not trying to pretend in here, right? We're trying to tell the truth of who we are out there so that we can make sense of God in here. And to only focus on the resurrection, to only focus on what's good in life, to only focus on what's happy in your life is childish. Part of being an adult and part of growing up in the faith is to lament and to name and mean, here are the things that are difficult about being human. It doesn't make you a whiner. It doesn't make you soft. It means you're committed to telling the truth. So consider Psalm 13. Listen to these words. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? I want to start an email to someone like that tomorrow. That's your opening line. How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say I've prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Now, there are many psalms like Psalm 13, but Psalm 13 is a great, tight microcosm of what I mean by these psalms of disorientation and why the church has to be comfortable lamenting and grieving the state of the world. Right? So the church stands between the world as it is and the world as it will be in the new heavens and the new earth. And part of what it means to stand in that gap is to tell the truth about the distance between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And the way you tell that truth, the way you articulate that from the deepest part of who you are is through lament. It's through grief. It's through telling the truth. It's through confession. It's through these psalms of disorientation. But there are at least, I think, 5 things that are great about these psalms of disorientation. Psalms like Psalm 13. Number 1, here's what we learn about ourselves. When you're lamenting to God, when you're grieving to God, when you're accusing God of being absent, you are also acknowledging that God exists. To engage with God, even if it's to blame God, even if it's to question God, is to acknowledge that God is present. So what I'm saying is questioning God is an act of faith. And some of us grew up in church cultures that said, now you be a good boy and you be a good girl and don't ask big questions. And those church cultures never wrestled deeply with the content of the Psalms. Because the very act of questioning God is at some level a deep sign of faith. The book of Job. Number 2, when we lament or we cry out to God, we also betray the fact that we believe that God cares. That God is not vindictive, as some of the ancient religions that existed in the time of the Jews, that God is not arbitrary, just waiting to nuke people when they do bad, or if they don't appease all the wishes of all the gods, then they can disappear at any moment. That's not what Israel says about the God who created the world. Israel says this God cares deeply about the creation that he feels so connected to. So again, to question God, to cry out to God, to lament to God, to curse God, is to say, I believe you exist, that you're present, and I believe that you care. And I believe, number 3, that you might listen. That you might not just care, that you might not just have an empathetic heart towards the humanity that you created, but that you're actually attentive to the cries of your people. There's a Jewish proverb that I love, and it goes something like this: God counts the tears of mothers, for they uniquely understand the suffering of the world. Number 4, our lamenting, our grieving also suggests that God might do something. Now, we all know situations where we prayed and things got worse and God didn't do what we asked God to do. Of course that's true, and of course that's part of our experience. But we also know, if we stop to think about it, times when God did move, when God acted in powerful ways. And so lamenting, part of the lamenting process is to acknowledge, God, I think you can do something. I think you have it within your capability to remove the cancer that's in the 4-year-old boy that we're praying for. I think you can put that marriage back together. God, I think you have what's in you to repair all the broken things about our city, as we just were learning about with YES. God, we believe you might act. And then number 5, as you read all the Psalms, you realize God's not just listening to the prayers of one person, but he's listening to the prayers of all people. All the laments, all the pain. So he's not just worried about me and my cousin's dog's surgery next week, right? And all the little things. He's listening to all the prayers and all the laments, all the unspeakable pain and silent suffering that exists in humanity. Several years ago, I read a book called Joy Unspeakable. And the author makes this observation that when slaves from West Africa were taken in the Middle Passage, it's estimated by many historians that 6 million slaves were killed on their way from West Africa to the New World in about a 150-year period. Now, 6 million is important because that's the same number of Jews who died in the Holocaust, approximately. And so she goes back and she looks at, in her book, Unspeakable Joy, she looks at the significance of moaning and groaning in art and music that comes out of African American culture. So if you think about hip-hop or R&B or black gospel music, there's an element of moaning and groaning, which is to a white Protestant audience will fall on deaf ears because it is not our experience. And here's what she says about this. She says the groaning comes out of the suffering of slaves. The moan becomes the vehicle for articulating that which can never be voiced. Moans are the utterance of choice when circumstances snatch words and prayers from bereft lips. On the slave ships, the moan became the language of stolen strangers, the articulation of unspeakable fears, the precursor to joy yet unknown. If you've ever been around a mother who's just lost a baby, there are no words in the English language. Usually what comes out of that deep, or a father, deep searing grief are cries and moans. Why is it that when the Apostle Paul in the grand crescendo of arguably his greatest work in the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 8, when the Apostle Paul is trying to help people see, okay, here's the world as it is, here's the world as it will one day be, and this is what it means to be a midwife between the world as it is and the world as it will be. Why is it that one of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world, who has a million metaphors at his disposal, he chooses an experience in metaphor that is beyond his own understanding? He says, okay, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like this. It's like a mother who's 9 months pregnant, and she just wants to have the baby. And she's beyond words and platitudes that people say to her at church, like, when this baby going to come? I'll let you know when this baby's going to come, right? And Paul says, that's what creation is like. All creation is groaning, is yearning, is moaning for the redemption of all of planet Earth, starting with the renewal of our bodies. There are some things that are beyond words, that go beyond our ability to articulate them. And I'm saying that's what the Psalms are in the Bible. They speak for us when our words fail. They go before us when we don't know what to say, we don't know what to think, and we can't make sense of everything that's happening around us. This is my hunch. I believe that every person I've ever met is carrying some measure of disappointment with how things have turned out. A relationship, a marriage, a parent-child conversation, a family secret. There's something, and it may not even be big in your life, but there's something that feels unresolved, and you have to properly name and grieve that, or it will own you. This is what the New Testament calls strongholds. The principalities and powers will hold you back from who you could be if you don't deal with it. In 1977, the Russian KGB arrested a brilliant Jewish mathematician named Anatoly Sharansky. Sharansky had been trying to immigrate to Israel for several years because he didn't feel safe in Russia, and the KGB learned of this, so they put him in what we would call the Soviet Gulag. He was in prison for 13 years. His wife went all over the world, coming to the United States, advocating on her husband's behalf to be released. Nothing happened. When he was finally released in 1990, Sharansky was interviewed by several people. And one reporter asked him, she said, was it knowing that your family was out there praying for you and advocating for you, is that what sustained you? And he said, no. Was it knowing that Jews and Christians and Muslims from all over the world were aware of your situation? Did that give you great hope and sustenance? No. He said, the only thing that got me through those 13 years were the 150 Psalms that I read every day in their original language of Hebrew. In fact, he says one time the guards were messing with him and they took his Torah, they took his Jewish scriptures from him. And when it was time for him to have his few moments outside for that day, he threw himself in the snow and the ice, and he refused to go back into the prison until they promised to give him back his Jewish scriptures in the form of the Psalms. In the first interview that he gave after his release, he said this. He said, gradually, because of the Psalms and the pain and the grief and the lament, he said, gradually, great sorrow morphed into hope. So it's in that spirit that I want you to hear a few Psalms this morning. See, I know someone in this church. I know her well, and she wrestles with depression. She's in a good place right now, but it's like the undercurrent of the ocean. It's tried to take her under a few times. And I asked her recently, I said, tell me a psalm that has meant the most to you. Give me one. And she said Psalm 20. The Lord answer you in the day of trouble. The name of the God Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and give you support from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your plans. May we shout for joy over your victory. And in the name of our God, set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord will help his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with mighty victories by his right hand. Some take pride in chariots, some in horses, but our pride is in the name of the Lord our God. They will collapse and fall, but we shall rise and stand upright. Give victory to the King, O Lord. Answer us when we call. I know someone else in this church at a young age who received a devastating medical diagnosis. And I've heard him and his wife say that Psalm 55 is the psalm that has sustained them through their affliction. Give ear to my prayer, O God. Do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me. Answer me. I am troubled in my complaint. I am distraught by the noise of the enemy because of the clamor of the wicked. For they bring trouble upon me, and in anger they cherish enmity against me. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. Day and night they go around it on its walls, and iniquity and trouble are within it. Ruin is in its midst. Oppression and fraud do not depart from its marketplace. It is not enemies who taunt me. I could bear that. It is not adversaries who deal insolently with me. I could hide from them. But it is you, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend, with whom I kept pleasant company. We walked in the house of God with the throng. Let death come upon them. Let them go down alive to Sheol, for evil is in their homes and in their hearts. I know another mother in this church, a young mother, who experienced the loss of a baby. And she says that Psalm 13 is the psalm that means the most to her. So let's stand together and read this. Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And so we pray, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God, as we continue to worship and receive prayers in the prayer room and down front with shepherds, God, may you surgically expose every heart to themselves this morning, to each individual in this room, of the secret pain and grief and disappointment that we carry. God, help us not turn our face from it in embarrassment, but to recognize that the things we carry are part of our path to freedom. God, help us to understand that the secrets or the hurts or the disappointments or the anguish or the betrayal, those things that still sting deeply, God, are part of how we understand our lives before you and each other. And God, for all the ways that we have been disappointed, and God, for all the ways that we have been confused, and for all the ways that you have not answered our prayers, God, we ask in the fullness of time that you reveal your wisdom to us so that our faith could be deeper. But God, in the midst of that, we will cry out, we will question, we will yell, we will curse, we will express to you our disappointment because we stand, God, between the world as it is and the world as it will be, and we can't see everything that you see. We can't make sense of all the violence that's in the world like you can. We can't make sense of the disease that still runs rampant in different parts of the world, and hunger and poverty and sexual abuse and the manipulation of our politicians and government systems. God, we do not have the ability to understand how this all fits together. So God, if you hear nothing else this morning in our prayers, God, hear people who believe that you exist, that you care, that you listen, that you might do something, and that you listen to the prayers of everyone. God, would you envelop this space? Would you fill this room with your Spirit as together we pray? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below. In you I rest, in you I find my hope, in you I trust. You never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. The hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past. All safe and blessed, we shall meet at last. In you I rest, in you I find my hope, in you I trust. You'll never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul.
his peace and grace with us as we leave here today.
This is not a toy, okay? We can't touch that.
What about a piece of gum? Do you know how to chew gum?
Yeah.
Ooh. I'll give you a piece of gum. How about
He's
that?
like, what did you say?
Look at his face. He's like,
One of the ladies that was helping downstairs, she goes, "He is so cute." She goes, "I go, what's your name?"
Oh, no, he did not.
Well, when you know, right?
That is hilarious. Wait, did you hear what Imogene was calling herself? Someone Adam asked her what her middle name was. She said, so your middle name is Jean? She said, no. She said, my middle name is Imogene Jellybean, cutest little thing I've ever seen. Like, Imogene. No, I'm like, Imogene, do you know your last name? No. Like, what's your last name? She finally learned her last name like 2 weeks ago. Finally.
That's adorable.
What do you think? If you don't ever say it to them, how would they know? They're never called Imogene Young. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Landon, dude, that is not a great idea.
I mean, what's a trip to the ER? I mean,
Yeah, come on. Like there's a tree.
Come on, let's go. You are more than welcome anytime.
Appreciate it, dude.
Evelyn, let's go.
Bye, Evelyn.